right around the mosque. Does that mean all of Palestine? And there's different opinions. We see a majority opinion that says the area around the mosque and its surrounding cities. So for example, some people may even have said to the extent of all of Palestine, some have said Jerusalem and go out 100 miles each way. There are different opinions, but we can stick with the majority, which is the cities around Masjid al-Aqsa or the Aqsa Mosque. This is the birthplace of many prophets, as I mentioned. Al-Aqsa is the second house of worship on earth. This is something very important to us. The first house of worship that God sent down as a house of worship was what we believe built by Abraham, his father and his son, Ishmael. And this is what we call the Kaaba. You guys all remember during pilgrimage, CNN and Fox and everyone goes to, they start forecasting images of the Kaaba, the big black cube, 3 million people going around it. That's what we call the Kaaba. This is, we believe, the first house of worship on earth. The second house of worship that we believe was built 40 years later was Masjid al-Aqsa. It has a very deep significance to Muslims. The first Qibla, this is the first direction of prayer. So when Muhammad, peace be upon him, was praying, he was literally facing this direction, the masjid, the direction of Al-Aqsa. So he was in the middle of Saudi Arabia in a town called Mecca, and he would face Palestine in that direction to pray to God. Muslims have one direction of prayer to keep some sort of unity when they're praying to God. You can obviously pray to God whenever you'd like, but in our formal prayers, our obligatory prayers, we face one direction. Muhammad, peace be upon him, led the prophets in prayer, led all of the prophets, we believe, in prayer over there at Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the conquest of Palestine is very, sometimes not mentioned too much in our history books. The famous conquest of Umar and the famous conquest of Saladin, Salahuddin, as his name is. We can go to the next slide. I'm not going to talk about that too much. So let's talk about some brief historical background. And actually, believe it or not, I know the topic is Palestine-Israel 101. This is going to be my focus of the talk today. I feel sometimes like we miss the point on getting to the history of things and what actually happened way back then. Way back when, and towards the end of my discussion, I'll be talking about what's happening in Israel today and in Palestine today. So, prophetic history, we talked about that for a bit. Jews exiled to Egypt out of Jerusalem. So the Jews were basically exiled out of Egypt. This is deep into history now, right? I'm not going to talk to you or bore you too much with the history, but it's important to brush up on, I think. So the Jews were exiled to Egypt out of the land of Palestine, out of Jerusalem. And then Moses basically was revealed the Torah. The Torah was revealed to Prophet Moses, peace be upon him. Okay? During that session, after that, then you had the rule of Jewish kingdoms. You had a lot of different kingdoms, all at not all at once, yet sporadic times. Sometimes they fell, and another kingdom popped up. And this basically lasted for 200 or 300 years. Some historians say that it lasted 500 years. We can stick for 200 or 300. You can stick with 500, whatever. The Byzantine oppression of the Jews. The Jews throughout history, my dear friends, have been oppressed from one area of the world to another area of the world to the other area. Literally, anytime you study history, and specifically the history of the Jews, you see persecution and oppression throughout their whole history. It's so ridiculous how many times throughout history you'll see the Byzantines, the Romans, the Persians at one point, the Romans again, even Muslims at one point, all in certain degrees persecuted the Jews in their own rights. Hitler topped it off, and then we have another form of persecution that's happening today. Again, we'll talk about later on. And I don't want to downplay that, by the way, because this really has been a theme throughout Jewish history, this constant persecution of Jews. And then Muslims conquered Jerusalem in 637. And this is something very interesting. So the Muslims conquered Jerusalem in 637. I want to ask you guys a question. With what the media hype around is about Muslims and Jews and Muslims and Palestine and Israel, I'm going to make my voice a little deeper and create some sort of drama scene and King did it down the legs. What do you guys think the Muslims did to the Jews? Just imagine. They conquered the land. Here they go. This is their chance to wipe every Jew off of the face of the planet. What did they do in 637? This is documented history, brothers and sisters. You can challenge me on it any day of the week. Please do challenge me on it any day of the week. Sharia law, which guarantees religious freedom to Jews and Christians and any other religion. This is something that has never been seen in Jewish history until that time, because they were constantly persecuted by the Byzantines, by the Romans, and by everyone else for that matter. Under Islamic law, I'm not going to tell you it was some utopia, like everyone was fine and dandy and everyone hugged and kissed and they sang kumbaya. I will not say that. That's obviously not true. But I will tell you this, that Jews, they have their own synagogues in Muslim lands. And if you don't believe me, they're still up till today. Why didn't the Muslims get rid of the Wailing Wall? Why don't they just demolish that whole thing and take away with all of the temples in Palestine? Why didn't they do that at the time? So the Muslim conquest in 637 by Omar, who was the second caliph, who succeeded Abu Bakr, who succeeded the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself. When the conquest happened, the Muslims gave religious freedom to Christians and Jews. Yes, next point. Crusades came in. So here comes the decree of the Pope. Completely misunderstands the Bible, completely misunderstands the ideals of Catholicism, and the Pope sends out his mercenaries to go kill basically anyone who is of color, anyone who is Muslim, and anyone who is Jewish. And he sends them to the lands of Palestine. And in the history books, you can read, and a lot of historians have mentioned different stories about this, the blood of the Palestinians just in the streets, just rivers of blood from the massacres of the Crusades. Muslims, Jews, and colored people alike, and even some Christians for that matter. Some Christians were of different sect. Specifically Greek Orthodox Christians, they were very unliked by the Pope. So they were massacred as well. So the Crusades happened. It happened to both the Muslims and the Jews. And then here you have this very handsome looking guy, Saladin. One of my favorite characters in history. This guy is just amazing, by the way. If you haven't had a chance to read his history, do it objectively, right? There's a lot of garbage out there, all right? Just pick a book or pick a, well, I can't say that either. Good luck, find it on Google. Read his history, all right? If you want some resources, I'll do my best to maybe give you some afterwards. Saladin comes in, Salahuddin liberates Palestine in 1187. All right, here we go again. The Muslims got their chance again. We took over, we beat the Crusaders. We beat them. Now is our time to not only beat down the Jews again, because that's our stereotype, and we have to fulfill our stereotype, but also we're going to go and beat down some Christians too, because they're all infidels, and we hate infidels, and we kill all infidels, and then we eat them, and then barbecue their hearts. And that's the stereotype that we have. So what happened when Salahuddin came into Palestine yet again to conquer, to kick out the Crusades who were murdering Muslims, Christians, Jews, and people of color alike? What did he do? He kept the Christian monuments there. He prayed in a church. He prayed his prayer, his Muslim prayer, in the church to show the people that we need religious tolerance. He gave Jewish people their rights. And under Sharia law, if you do not know this, under Sharia law, by the way, which is so demonized right now, Christians are allowed to have their own religious set of rules. They have their own religious court that they go to. Jews have their own religious court that they go to that allows them to be to get ruling based off of Jewish law. They're not all subjugated to Muslim law. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because all throughout history, in Spain, in Malaysia, in every country in which you had more than one religion, excuse me for getting a little hyped up about this, I get a little excited about this topic, right? You have Muslims that have really set the tone for religious freedom. Again, I don't want to make it sound like a utopia. I don't want to make it sound like Muslims are so innocent throughout the ages. I'll tell you, Muslims have had their fair share of wrongdoings. Have there been Muslims who have murdered Jews outright in front of everyone? Absolutely. And those guys should be condemned. In many instances, they were condemned. One story that comes to mind was Amr ibn al-As. He was the governor of Egypt at the time of Omar, peace be upon him. So the governor, they get a decree that they want to basically build this mosque in an area, and they find out that this house is in the middle, not in the middle, but it basically takes part of this land of the mosque. They find out that this old lady owns this home. She turns out to be Jewish, of course. Turns out that this Jewish old lady, and the Muslims want to kick her out of her home. So they take it to the governor. The governor says, give her what is her due right. They give her, and they say, hey, we'll give you $1 million for whatever the property value was, right? I don't know. They give her the property value. She says, no, I don't want to sell. Forget you guys. I don't want to sell. I have puppies here. I really like them. I really like the view. So the governor says, well, expand the mosque, and because we're an Islamic government, we can do that. So she gets screwed out of her home. The Muslims build a mosque, and she goes and complains to the president of the Muslims, who we call the Caliph, all right? And his name was Umar. She complains to the Caliph Umar. And the Caliph Umar says, what does this say here? Tell me your story. She says X, Y, Z. He says, bring me Amr ibn al-As. He brings him, reprimands him, destroys the whole mosque from top to bottom, and rebuilds her house and gives her due right. This, my brothers and sisters, was the, how can I say, the documented stories that we have about Muslims and religious tolerance under Islamic law. Again, I don't want to create this utopian picture. There were some ugly instances. There were probably a lot of ugly instances. But institutionally, what the Quran teaches, what the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught us, were these awesome values. Next slide. So, the Jewish Golden Age of Spain. And sadly, I was reading a lot of articles about a lot of Jewish historians really downplaying this era and really talking about just a lot of negative things that happened in this era. And they really just basically completely missed the point about this whole age. This whole Jewish golden age, so to speak. And I really want to talk about this for a sec. Mark R. Cohen, who's a Jewish historian, he focuses on medieval Jewish history. He says something very interesting. He says, Jews were far more integrated in the political and economic systems or economic life of the Islamic society and usually faced far less violence from Muslims. Though there were some instances of persecution in the Islamic world as well from the 11th century, the Islamic world classified Jews and Christians as what we call dhimmi. I'll explain that a little later. And allowed them to practice their religion more freely than they could do in Christian Europe. So what happened in Spain? What happened in Spain is that Muslims basically kind of started to grow their government, so to speak. And they went all the way to the shores of Spain. And they basically released the people of Spain from their conquerors, who at that time were, again, Roman Crusaders at that time. The Crusaders, actually, I'm sorry, hadn't happened at that moment. They were just the Roman Empire, obviously a Christian Empire at that time. Muslims basically took over the majority of Spain. Not all of it, but the majority of Spain. Major cities like Cordoba, Alhambra, a lot of major cities in Spain. So, what happened was there was a big Jewish migration into Spain. There were a lot of Jews that were already living in Spain that were under Christian law, in which they weren't really flourishing. So, throughout this period of 600-700 years that Muslims ruled Spain, 600 or 700 years, both Muslim culture and Jewish culture flourished like no tomorrow. During this period, this is what we call the Dark Ages of Christian Europe. This is what we call the Dark Ages, all right? The Dark Period. You know when you study in your history book in 7th grade, the only thing you cover is the Dark Ages. Now, everything sucked, and everything smelled, and there was garbage on the street, and nobody wore deodorant, and this and that, and it was just like a really ugly, nobody tied their shoes, it was horrible. There was no face look, all right? All right, anyway. So it was a very ugly, disgusting part of history. In that same time period, in that same time frame, during the Dark Ages, you had an amazing renaissance of golden age for both the Jews and the Muslims in Spain under Islamic rule. Because they took care of history, they took care of science, they took care of these different types of studies or disciplines that were really relevant. They started making amazing advancements in medicine. They started hospitals and universities. They worried about their culture. They worried about massive and beautiful gardens and architecture. They really took care of their society. There was no drama. So this, brothers and sisters, I'm getting to a point here. This big mess about Muslims hating Jews, this big mess about Arabs and Jews never got along since the beginning of mankind, I want to tell you is very, very false. And it's not only false, it's kind of disgusting. To paint this picture that Muslims never liked Jews to begin with is a very disgusting interpretation of history. And please don't get me wrong. There were absolute instances where Muslims and Jews clashed. Absolutely. Instances where maybe some Muslims committed massacres against the Jews. That probably happened, and we completely condemn that. We can't, you can't control everything. But the overall system is what's important here. Because the same happened to Muslims all throughout history, by the way. From the beginning of their inception as an Islamic society. There was persecution from the Arabs at the time, Arab non-Muslims. There was persecution from the Christians. There was persecution from from the Jews during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. They broke numerous treaties with the Prophet. But again, this gross misunderstanding that they hate each other is completely false. Moving on, the land of Palestine was ruled by the Muslims for some 700 years. All right? Yes?
How would you say that the Muslims got control of Spain? Would you say that was a peaceful process?
There was a war. So number one, there was two things on different fronts. On the Cordoba front, there was a war between the Christians, the Roman Christians that were there, and the Muslims. On other fronts, you had, actually, there's even documents of Jewish, leaders of Jewish tribes that were in Spain that sent letters to the Muslims saying, come and fight the Roman Empire on this end because of overtaxation and because of religious freedom. There was no religious freedom at the time. And the same token, there were also Christian letters that we found throughout history. I'm saying we as I'm a historian, but that we, the world, found as documents also from Christian historians, or from Christian leaders, during that time in Spain, that called the Muslims to come and relieve them of the Roman rule. The last thing I will say is Abdurrahman II. He's the one that really kind of pushed this idea of going into Spain. Some Muslims say it was preemptive. I don't buy it. A lot of Muslim historians, the majority, say that it was basically a raid to get into Spain to teach people about Islam, and really from there, there was a lot of deaths in the battles. I can send you some information if you know about the battles themselves. And one book that I was reading, one story I was reading, one of the battles had maybe some 20 or 30 deaths in the whole battle. And there was a lot of retreats, and it was really 200 years of kind of give and take, and then 500 years of like Muslim rule, and the demise of the Muslim rule towards the end. Good question. So Muslims ruled Palestine for like some 700 years. All right, I'm talking. There was two empires, mainly the Ottoman Empire towards the end, ruled it for some 400 or 500 years, and then this brings us to World War I. The Ottoman Empire decides to jump into World War I. They get their butts kicked, and then here comes Sykes-Picot. You guys know anything about this? It's basically a British guy, a French guy. It's like a typical joke. Oh yeah, a British guy, French guy, and a German. They basically bring the map of the Ottoman Empire and they start carving it. They say, okay, this looks like Lebanon. This looks like Jordan right here. This is a nice piece of land. We'll call this Iraq. We'll do this. And they basically started carving out the Middle East into separate countries. Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and all these little countries. Beautiful move called divide and conquer. It was genius on their end. They divided the Islamic nation at that time. And now you have small nation states who all hate each other. They eat the same food. They have basically the same language. But they all, Lebanese hate Syrians. Nobody stands the Egyptians. You have small little stupid quarrels amongst their enemies. So Israel's statehood in 1948. I'm not going to talk about the establishment of Zionism. I think that's something that you can research on your own. But I'll talk about Israel's statehood in 1948. Basically the UN mandate to create the State of Israel was pushed obviously by Great Britain at that time, it was pushed by France, it was pushed by the United States. And then in 1967 you have the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, all coming under Israeli occupation in 1967. Next slide. I'll be talking about a lot of this in depth in the next couple slides. So let's look at this map. Again, sorry guys, I'm super visual. This is the only way I learn, so I hope this is the way you learn. This is Palestine, all right? This is the carved up version of Palestine. You notice the straight lines? No country will be able to form straight lines, all right? Some guy with a ruler did that, okay? So this is Palestine as we know it today. Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, which is where I'm from. I was born and raised here, but my parents are from Lebanon. So here's Palestine, 1946. 100% of Palestine was owned by the Palestinians. 100% of Palestine was owned by the Palestinians. It's like saying the United States of America. 100% of the United States of America is owned by Americans. All right, it just kind of is like death. I'm just kind of saying something that is not even important to say. All right. So then here comes 1947 and 1948 and the years to come. And when we have, all of a sudden, this massive state of Israel really being plopped on this piece of land called Palestine. The Palestinians didn't want it. The neighboring Arab nations didn't want it. but foreign countries that were hundreds and thousands of miles away wanted it. So you have Great Britain. Let me say this very bluntly, and please excuse me for saying this. Great Britain didn't want the problem that they saw a problem of the Jews. They didn't want a massive Jewish migration into Great Britain. France did not want a massive Jewish migration into France. And the United States sure didn't want it either, even though obviously there was a massive Jewish migration that came into the United States and flourished as a major role in the population over here in the States. And I say that bluntly because there's a lot of records of history in which both countries expressed very bluntly their disliking of a Jewish migration into their countries. So they decided, okay, here we go, Israel. We don't have to talk about the details of how it happened, but you can just tell from 1946 to 1947, there was some shady business going on. All right, this doesn't happen overnight. All right, you can tell, but there's some shady business going on. And I'll give you guys an analogy. You can agree or disagree. I live in Laverne. I have a small, 1,200 square foot house in Laverne. Me and my wife live there very happily. Laverne's a small town, a couple thousand, not a couple thousand, but a small, American town type of thing. It has you have your diner and stuff like that all over the place. Gas station with, wood all over the place. Anyways, Laverne, all right? And I live in this 1,200 square foot house. It has 2 bedrooms. So it's like one day, this one guy from out of town, maybe from Irvine, comes over and says, hey there, I'm going to go ahead and take over your room. And I'm going to take over your master bedroom. And I said, yeah, shut up. It's not going to happen. And then he says, no, seriously, I'm coming in tomorrow. And so he comes in tomorrow and takes over my master bedroom. And this is the absurd part of history that really I didn't understand for the longest time. So what did you think was going to happen? What did you think was going to happen? You could just take over my master bedroom, and I'm not going to say anything? Please, come welcome. And then bring out some hummus and some falafel and give you hugs, and put some rose petals as you walk into the door? Would any of you do that? In your own homes, honestly. Forget the Israeli, Jewish, Arab, Muslim, Palestinian conflict. Put that aside. Would you allow that to happen in your own homes? Never. Never. Would any of us allow this to happen? I for sure would not. I would literally pop out my shotgun and put it and get ready. You're not coming into my house. Excuse the violence. But I actually like shotguns there. I guess that probably shouldn't be said. That's probably a stereotype. Not helping the cause here, I guess. But hey, I'm American, right? Americans like guns, I guess. Right? So I would definitely not allow that to happen in my own home. So what did they think was going to happen in Palestine? That the Palestinians were just going to say, okay, that's a great idea. I love the idea of another country coming and taking, 40% of the land. I don't have a problem with that. I don't understand that at all. What did they think was going to happen when we took over Mexican territory in this country? California, Arizona, New Mexico. What did they think was going to happen? That the Mexicans were just going to sit there and say, hey, yeah, come on, take it over. What did they think the Native Americans were going to say? Oh, please, we welcome you? Of course not. Brothers and sisters, please, this is absurd. And again, this is not against anyone per se. It's just an absurd idea to think that nothing was going to happen. So to make this big deal about how there's this massive occupation, this massive resistance of the Palestinians, and there's this massive uproar, and then the Intifada. I mean, Dad, what did you think was going to happen? So this is my first, just very basic logical argument. Now, we have to agree. Again, whether you're pro, con, whatever, all right? You have to agree when another country comes onto another existing country or piece of land, even if it's swampland for that matter. If the swampland was owned by someone else, all right, which again is completely false. Palestine didn't have any swamps in it. Sure, there was parts of it that had swampland, but this idea that it was just desolate land has been distorted and has been proven by many historians over. But let's just say it was all swampland. If it was owned by someone else, this idea of another country coming in is just absurd. To think that there would be no reaction. Number 3, 1948, you can just see